We were deep in the jungle of Vietnam, sent on a recon mission to track down enemy forces hiding in the thick underbrush. But what we encountered in those trees was something we were never supposed to find. Something that wasn't human. The locals called them the Rock Apes, and by the time we realized what they were, it was already too late. We weren't prepared for what the jungle was hiding, and we never should have been sent in the first place. My name is Sergeant Thomas Webb, and I was part of a reconnaissance unit, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry. It was 1968, and the war was dragging on. We were stationed at a small fire base in the Central Highlands, a place where the jungle was as much of an enemy as the Viet Cong we were supposed to be hunting down. Our orders were simple, but nothing about that night was normal. We were told to conduct a recon mission in the dense, uncharted region just north of the A Shao Valley. This area had been marked as a no-go zone, a place where we lost multiple units before, never finding their bodies. The operation was dubbed Operation Black Veil. We were tasked with locating and eliminating suspected VC forces hiding out in caves. It sounded routine at first, until the briefing. The room was dim, the air thick with tension. Our CO was quiet, almost too quiet. He didn't go into details, just handed us the standard loadouts, M16s, frag grenades, radios, and standard issue packs. But he didn't mention anything about the jungle itself, how strange how dangerous it had become. That was left for the interpreter to bring up later. He was a local, older than most of us, with dark eyes that didn't seem to blink. He pulled me aside when the briefing ended. He looked at me, and for a second it felt like he could see straight through me. "Stay close to your men, Sergeant," he said, his voice low and shaking. "There are things in that jungle that are not what they seem. The jungle is alive. Don't let it fool you." At first, I thought it was just the usual paranoia you get with this kind of work, but his words stuck with me. They didn't sit right. I had been in the jungle long enough to know it had a way of getting to your head, but that was different. But that was only the beginning. The convoy rolled out early that morning, the trucks rumbling over the dirt roads as the dull roar of chopper blades sliced through the heavy jungle air. The mission felt like just another recon, routine even. We'd done this 100 times before. Drive out, check in with the locals, secure the site, and start sweeping for any enemy presence. The guys were in their usual pre-mission moods, quiet, focused, but with that thin layer of humor to keep the tension at bay. The kind of joking that lets you know it's a normal day. Some of them even started with the old banter about how we'd probably end up chasing ghosts again. Same story, different jungle, no surprises. The sun was still low when we hit the outskirts of the village. It had the usual signs of life at first glance. The buildings crammed together in a tight, dusty little cluster, smoke rising from a few of the huts. But as we drove deeper, something felt off. That sense of unease that I couldn't shake. The heat had already begun to settle in, and the humidity made the air feel thick, like I was breathing through a wet towel. It wasn't the usual scorching heat, though. No, this felt heavier, thicker. We parked just outside the village, as per usual, the engine noise of the trucks fading to a dull hum in the background. Our orders were clear: patrol through the area, confirm the evacuation was completed, and start the sweep. Standard procedure. No big deal. Everyone moved in like they'd done 100 times before. Weapons checked, helmets secured, and eyes scanning the surroundings. But then it hit me, the silence. It was too quiet, way too quiet for a village that was supposed to be empty. Usually, even if the locals had cleared out, there'd be some signs: dogs barking, kids playing, or at least the buzz of flies around the waste piles. Nothing. The air was still, like the whole place was holding its breath. It wasn't a dead silence, but something close, something off. My radio crackled to life, just a quick burst of static. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but in that moment, I felt that tightening in my chest. It wasn't the usual crackle you get when you're in dense terrain. It was too consistent, like the signal was being jammed or blocked. Nothing serious, just an irritating background hum, but it added another layer to the unease that was already crawling up my spine. I tapped my ear, signaling Collins, the radio guy, who was walking a few steps ahead. He didn't need to check it again to know. He didn't elaborate, but the way he said it made the air feel even heavier. The Shao Valley was a place we all knew well. Too well. Too many stories about what happened out there, and none of them had happy endings. We pushed forward, chalking up the static and the silence as part of the routine, just another obstacle. But as we crossed into the heart of the village, something else started to make my skin crawl. No locals, not a single person in sight. Usually, even if they were scared of us, they'd still be watching from a distance, peering out of their huts or behind trees. But here, nothing. Not a single soul. The absence of life was wrong. You could feel it in your bones. It wasn't just the people. No animals either. No chickens pecking around. No goats bleating in the distance. Even the air felt dead, like the whole place had been sucked dry of anything living. I looked around, trying to dismiss the feeling. It's just nerves, I told myself. Everyone else seemed to think so too. But then one of the guys, Youngblood, who was usually the first to crack a joke, said something that made everyone pause. "Didn't you hear the chickens last night?" I froze. The night had been dead silent. Not even a bird. Not a single rustle of leaves. It was the kind of silence you get when something's stalking you. When you're not alone in the woods, but the woods are holding their breath, waiting. I shook my head. "It's nothing," I muttered. "We're fine. It's just still." As we moved deeper, we passed a few abandoned huts, but there was something off about them too. A couple of the doors were left slightly ajar, and through the cracks I could see the interior, broken furniture, the remnants of a fire long extinguished, but not a single person. Not even an old woman's bundle of belongings left behind in a rush. It was like they had just vanished. The final piece that pushed the tension into overdrive came when I noticed the villagers' tracks on the ground. There were fresh prints, but no one was around. The tracks had been made recently, as if the villagers had been in a hurry. And then it hit me. These people didn't just leave, they ran. That's when we reached the site and everything changed. At first, we tried to tell ourselves it was just the heat. The jungle had a way of messing with your head, making you see things that weren't there, hear things that weren't real. But as we pushed deeper into the village, I could feel that tightness in my chest again. Something wasn't right. The silence that had hung over the place wasn't just the absence of sound, it was like the air itself was holding its breath. We moved cautiously, staying close, making sure to cover each other's flanks. It was routine at first, just like we'd done 100 times before. But every now and then my eyes would catch something, and I'd have to shake it off, like the feeling of being watched from behind trees, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up for no reason at all. Then it happened. We hit the edge of the village and saw it, footprints. At first glance, they looked like human tracks, barefoot, fresh in the mud, just like the villagers might have left behind as they hurried away. But the closer we got, the more wrong they seemed. They were too deep, too wide. The toes were longer than they should have been, almost unnatural. And there was something about the pattern that didn't match a human gait, like they were walking on all fours but standing up at the same time. I knelt down to take a closer look, tapping Collins on the shoulder. "What do you make of these?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I could feel the tension building. He crouched next to me, examining the prints. "These are wrong," he muttered. "It's not human, not even close." I could hear the doubt in his voice. Had been in enough combat zones to know when something was off, but this was something different. He stood up, wiping the dirt off his hands, and gave me a look. "We keep moving. No sense in dwelling on it." We moved on, but the atmosphere kept getting thicker. And that's when the equipment started acting up. First, it was my GPS, just a flicker of static, like it had malfunctioned. Then the comms were cutting in and out, the static coming through so loud it drowned out everything else. Even the radios, usually as reliable as anything, started to crackle and pop with interference that didn't make any sense. "This is weird," said Ortiz, the comms specialist. He yanked at the radio wires, but the static wouldn't go away. The dead air was suffocating. We weren't even close to the Ashau Valley, but this felt like one of those places, one of those spots in the jungle where all the usual rules didn't apply. Then, we started to notice the smell. At first it was faint, like something burning, like old wood smoldering in the distance. But then it got stronger, like something rotting, something unnatural, a stench that clung to the air and made it hard to breathe. The temperature dropped too. I swear it was like a chill was creeping up on us from the ground. In the middle of that thick, suffocating humidity, it felt like we had walked into a freezer. It was all these little things adding up, too many strange details to be ignored. But we kept moving, trying to stay focused, trying to tell ourselves it was just the jungle playing tricks on us. Then, we reached the first of the old huts. It looked abandoned, but there was something off about it. As we approached, I noticed something carved into the doorframe, old symbols, scratched into the wood. They weren't from any tribe I recognized. These weren't markings from any of the locals we'd seen in the other villages. I took a step closer, reaching out to touch the marks, when I caught sight of something even worse. Bones. Not human bones. Animal bones, arranged in a rough circle placed with care, almost like some kind of ritualistic offering. They were half buried in the dirt, left there as if to ward off something. The very sight of them sent a chill through me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. It was too quiet, even for the jungle. We stood there for a moment, none of us saying a word. Then, without warning, there was a crash in the distance, loud, too loud. A tree fell, branches snapping like a rifle shot. It sounded far off, but too close at the same time. And when it hit the ground, it was followed by a low, deep growl that made every nerve in my body stand on edge. We turned and looked at each other. Something had hurt us, and it wasn't human. But that was just the beginning. We were moving deeper into the jungle, the thick underbrush scraping at our arms and legs as we cut through the dense foliage. The atmosphere was heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was watching us. We'd been on edge for hours now, the strange smell still lingering in the air, the temperature dipping unnaturally low for this time of year. Everyone was quiet, too quiet, but we pushed forward, trying to shake the unease that had settled over us. It was Sergeant Collins who first heard it, a low, guttural sound coming from the trees. At first I thought it was just a trick of the wind, some animal caught in the undergrowth, but then it came again, closer this time, almost, like a growl, but not quite. We all froze. That sound was like nothing I had ever heard before. It wasn't the growl of any animal we had seen in the jungle. It wasn't even the noise of a predator on the hunt. It was deeper, more primal, like it was coming from something older, something that didn't belong. I looked around at the others. No one had moved, not even to breathe. "Did anyone else hear that?" I whispered, but no one answered. The radio crackled in my ear, the static buzzing louder than usual, as if something was jamming the signal. That wasn't right. It shouldn't have been happening, not here, not so close to our base. I turned to the interpreter, hoping for some reassurance. His face was pale, eyes wide with something I couldn't place, fear, maybe, but there was more to it. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head slowly, his hands trembling. "Something is wrong," he muttered, his words barely audible. "The spirits, the jungle, it is angry." I didn't know what to make of that. We had all heard the rumors, the old tales of spirits that haunted the jungle, the stories the locals shared around the campfires at night. But I thought it was just superstition. Until now. The moment he spoke, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The jungle was alive, sure, but in a way I had never believed, until now. The stillness was unnerving, like everything in the jungle had gone quiet, all the birds, the insects, nothing. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, without warning, something moved in the trees above us. A shadow darted across the canopy, too large, too fast to be human, but not anything like the normal wildlife either. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, like they were reaching. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like the jungle was alive and watching us. "We need to get out," Collins muttered, his voice tight, but we didn't move. Something held us there, the feeling of dread mounting by the second. And then, it happened. The sound of branches snapping echoed through the trees, but this time it wasn't just a tree breaking. It was something else, something massive, something that didn't belong in this world. My heart pounded in my chest as the growl grew louder, almost vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. That's when the real shock came. A figure stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't human. It was taller than any man, covered in matted fur, its arms reaching down to the ground like some kind of beast. I could see its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness, watching us. We froze, staring, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. But the fear, the absolute bone-deep fear, told us everything we needed to know. It wasn't a man. It wasn't a beast. It was something else entirely. We stood frozen, staring at the creature in the shadows. It was too big to be human, but it moved like it knew exactly where it was going, like it wasn't afraid of us at all. The fur was dark, matted, with dirt and blood, hanging in patches like it had been through hell. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the moonlight, were locked on us, reflecting a predatory hunger. I couldn't breathe. My hands felt numb, my grip on my rifle tightening as I tried to process what I was seeing. Then, without warning, it moved. The creature lunged forward. Its speed was unreal, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It didn't run, it didn't rush, it just moved. Like a shadow darting through the trees, it closed the distance in seconds. We didn't even have time to react. A massive arm shot out, knocking Ortiz off his feet like he was a rag doll. The sound of bones cracking filled the air, and his scream was cut off before it even reached our ears. I didn't think. I just fired. My M16 roared to life, but the bullets didn't seem to do anything. They hit it, but the creature didn't flinch. It didn't even slow down. It just kept coming. The air around it seemed to ripple, like the very jungle itself was bending, warping in response to its presence. Something deep in my gut told me that this wasn't just an animal. This wasn't just some sick joke. This was something ancient. Something that the jungle had been hiding for far too long. The ground beneath us shook as another massive figure dropped from the trees, landing with the force of a freight train. It wasn't alone. There were more of them. Shadows flickering, moving like predators closing in for the kill. A low growl rumbled from the depths of the jungle, and the sound of rocks scraping together echoed in the distance. The creatures weren't just attacking. They were hunting us. We scattered, breaking formation. But the jungle turned against us. The trees seemed to close in, the foliage wrapping around our legs, trapping us in place. The creature that had first attacked Collins was on him now, its massive hands wrapping around his neck. He didn't scream. He didn't have time. The creature ripped him apart with a single swipe, and just like that, he was gone. I couldn't see Ortiz anymore. The panic had set in, making everything blur. My team was scattered, running in different directions, but we weren't fast enough. The growls, the snapping of branches, the sound of claws scraping against stone. It was all around us. And in that moment, I knew we weren't alone. The jungle wasn't just alive. It was awake, and it was hunting us. And that's when everything changed. We didn't think, we just ran. It was chaos. The jungle, once a place we'd learned to navigate to survive in, had turned into a death trap. It was like the trees themselves were closing in on us, the thick foliage becoming an insurmountable barrier. We fired back, but there was no enemy to shoot at, no clear target. The creatures, those things, moved with such speed, they were like ghosts, slipping in and out of the shadows, always just beyond our reach. We were on our own, no backup, no reinforcements, nothing. I remember sprinting, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my rifle slung over my shoulder. The sounds of my squad's footsteps were muffled by the thick underbrush. Every second felt like an eternity. But then, without warning, the firefight started. The first burst of gunfire came from behind me. I spun around, expecting to see a flash of muzzle fire from a fellow soldier, but there was nothing, just the jungle, dark and still. The next round came from my left, ricocheting off a tree, narrowly missing my ear. My heart raced. This wasn't a fight we could win. We weren't fighting men. We were fighting something otherworldly. The creatures weren't afraid of our guns, of our tactics. They were faster than anything we'd ever trained for. Stronger. It was clear that nothing in our standard issue kit was going to stop them. I turned back to check on my men. Collins, Youngblood, Ortiz, where were they? But in the haze of panic, the faces blurred. The fear was like a fog settling over us. The radio was useless, static buzzing in and out, no orders coming through. Our last communication with command was a garbled mess, a few words that barely made sense. There was no help coming. We were on our own. A shout from the rear snapped me out of my daze. I turned just in time to see a figure, Youngblood, I think, stumbling through the underbrush. Blood was dripping from his side, but he was still moving, still trying to get away. I ran toward him, grabbing him by the shoulder, pulling him along, but we were running blind, no clear path, no backup. We finally found a clearing some small semblance of a defensible position. But even then, we weren't safe. The sounds of the creatures closing in on us were louder now, the growls echoing off the trees, the ground vibrating beneath our feet. We fired into the dark, but it didn't matter. They were already gone. The firefight ended as quickly as it had started. The jungle fell silent. The air was thick with the smell of blood, sweat, and something else, something rancid. We didn't stop. We couldn't. We moved through the jungle for what felt like hours, dragging our wounded, trying to keep quiet, keep our heads down. But every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made us freeze to make sure we weren't being hunted again. When we finally reached the extraction point, if you could even call it that, everything felt wrong. The choppers were delayed. We had no way of knowing when they would show up, or if they'd even make it in time. There were no real answers, no clarity. When we were pulled out, no one spoke about what had happened in those woods. No one said anything about the creatures, about the things we had seen. Command was dismissive. They were angry that we were late, frustrated with the mess of the mission, but they weren't interested in what we had to say. No reports were filed. No one talked about the things we saw. All our reports were sealed, classified, locked away as if they never happened. There were no questions, no investigations, just silence. We were left with our memories, left to wonder if it had all been some fevered hallucination. But we knew the truth. We'd seen them, those things, and they were out there, waiting. But what happened next took things to another level. Whatever you think you know about this war, about the jungle, just remember this: some things are better left undisturbed. I've seen the files, sealed, buried, wiped from existence. But I know what I saw, and I'm not the only one who lived through it. There were other men who wouldn't speak about it, men who never came back. What we faced in those woods, it wasn't human, and it wasn't the enemy. I don't know what those creatures were, but they are still out there, waiting, watching, somewhere deep in that jungle. And if you hear something moving out there in the dark, in the trees, don't go looking for it. Whatever it is, it's not finished with us yet.